Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. It's a Ukraine War update extra video, giving the extra tidbits and nuggets to get your teeth into to give a greater understanding of the war in Ukraine. I haven't done one of these for so long now. It's just been a crazy few weeks, a few days. Summer's still here and family and whatever. Here is an extra. And we're going to start with something I've already talked about in my last video. Actually, I talked about this in my frontline update and said I will talk about this in my extra, so here it is. And this is what happens when electronic warfare works. Okay, so this is P*11 quoting from a Ukrainian signal soldier from July 2023. So this is a few months old now, but it still is within the counteroffensive, and it's around in the Zaporizhia front line, I believe, probably in the Robotina area or somewhere like that. So this happened in July when the 30th Brigade was on the offensive. When the fighters approached the enemy noticed this and transmitted it to the head communications center attacking them. We heard these radio conversations. At this moment, our guys almost reached the hostile fortifications. Then Russian artillery began firing at their own positions. Of course, our guys stopped to wait out the shelling, but it was so intense and prolonged that they waited for almost 2 hours. We thought, are the Russians shooting at themselves? We did not give the command for this. We did not give the command for this artillery strike, so it's not come from the Ukrainians. Here, we were able to intercept their communications and realized that the Russian main communication center could not hear the advanced units because electronic warfare was suppressing communications. They could not adjust the fire and thus attacked their own positions for 2 hours because there was only a distance of 200 meters between our fighters and theirs. Thanks to this, we managed to recapture the left side of the forest and the road. So this was, I mean, just huge. Yeah, what I mean, just huge barrage of artillery ordnance, and this is Russian ordnance landing on Russian positions. I mean, you can see the shock waves. You can see how much, this is what the Russians are saying. Ceasefire, we're being heavily shelled. Where the F are you shooting? Ceasefire. This is Rambo confirming the friendly fire, F, so on and so forth. Our guys are being shelled. Yeah, do you hear me, bitch? There's none of us left, F. Our guys are getting hit. Granite, ceasefire. This is Rambo. And then I'm the signalman, Granite. I will destroy all of you, F. And then it says, you destroyed a part of the front line. Nothing works. No one hears us. Doing the best I can. We got no one left. MF, Granite, ceasefire. If I come back, I will S on all of you. Is a claim. Oh, look at all those pock marks. Goodness me, that's absolutely insane amount of ordnance hitting that piece of land. That almost triggers my tryptophobia, or whatever it's called. I have a fear of like holes like that. It makes my brain go funky. Anyway, yeah, just that is the importance. As I said in my frontline update, that's the importance of electronic warfare. We're in a period of war that has changed from, 50 years ago. We're in a period where technology plays such a significant part, and electronic warfare, jamming communications and jamming drones is such a vital tool for either side. As you can see, if you can jam communications effectively, then it renders certain units helpless. And in this case, they're being bombed by their own side, and there's the square root of naff all that they can do about it. Yeah. Right, moving on to, this is a Defmon thread or sort of small bunch of posts, but he's really referring to this video. So he says, if you wonder why things are moving slowly, here's why. Ukraine are no longer trying to attack trenches, it's tunnels. And now you can argue about the definition of a tunnel here. Is this just a trench with wooden roof or whatever? It doesn't really matter. The point is that these defensive fortifications that the Russians are building present a real challenge for the Ukrainians. So here you can see the wooden ceiling on there, but it's all fairly substantial. These aren't just small waist-high trenches wide enough for just one person. These are much more substantial trench lines that are then covered over and have some kind of ability to withstand sustained fire certainly from mortars, you'd think. I don't know how thick it goes on top of those logs that are lying across, whether it's just the logs or whether there's logs and then earth. As you can see, it's somewhat different here, but then those are pretty new, decent looking trenches there. There's a wide variety of trench qualities, okay? So they're not all going to look like this, but when they do, it is a challenge for the Ukrainians. It will take much longer for them to take over positions like this, and there's talk about how these kind of underground tunnels and whatnot connect different layers of trenches, different sort of levels of defensive lines, and that. So, for example, if you've got like a major defensive line here, you may have like underground trenches or whatever that can connect. I mean, it's not evident there, but you might have a larger second line of defenses back there, and they're connected by tunnels, and that just means that the Russians can move from one layer to another safely, and that just makes it more difficult for the Ukrainians again. So just it is challenging for the Ukrainians on attack here, and that's why they are taking a long time. A lot of people say these are not tunnels, they're covered trenches. I consider those to be the same. These trenches are covered with logs and a thick layer of soil. I also see arguments they can be seen by thermal. I doubt it, but even if they can, that does not change the fact that they protect against artillery. The difference between an open trench and a covered trench is huge. Another example of the challenges for the attacking force here. Right, I shared the headline of this to you. So it's not too long a thread. Chris Wiki can sometimes have some huge threads, but this is worth sharing with you in full. Mobilized Russian soldiers fighting near Bakhmut have recorded a video complaining about the brutal and incompetent behavior of their commander. They reject orders to execute comrades, refusing to fight, and abandon the wounded. They say they are not being evacuated. And just publishing that video. So, in a 4-minute video, a group of at least 9 mobilized soldiers who say they are from the 76th Division. So these are the elite paratroopers that have been sent recently, or elements thereof have been sent to Robotyne to shore up the defenses there. These guys are in Bakhmut. There are claims that the 76th are in Crimea, Bakhmut, and now Robotyne. So the whole 76 isn't in any one given place, but elements are spread out and probably heavily degraded anyway. So a nominally elite paratroop group, they denounce what they call the criminal orders of their commander, call sign Rostov. The date when it was recorded isn't clear, but it's fairly likely it was made before the 76th Division was very recently transferred from the Donetsk region. Okay, so they might not be in Bakhmut now, they might be or in Crimea. They may all be down in the Robotyne area. We know, or we understand, that some of them have been in Tokmak, sent down there to then, I assume, go up to Robotyne. Whether there are any elements still in Crimea or indeed Bakhmut is unclear. But recently transferred from the Donetsk region to prop up the crumbling Russian defensive lines in Zaporizhia region. In the video, the spokesman of the group says, "We are tired of being silent about this, tired of enduring it, tired of losing our comrades. We are a reconnaissance division, probably the 175th Reconnaissance Battalion, but we are from the 76th Division. For 6 months, we have fought on the Bakhmut direction without rest, without leave, without replenishment and trained personnel." The man says that his unit is taking heavy casualties, 200s that's killed, 300s wounded, because of the thoughtless actions of our command. Our command makes them drop, doesn't let them pull out. Corpses are lying on the 0 line, the front line. The boys are bleeding. They're not evacuated at ground zero. In the area of contact with the enemy, there are criminal orders to chase the remnants of people forward to their positions on pain of death, to threaten them with the weapons and reprisals. In other words, we are sent to try, to kill soldiers in front of us who want to retreat or who aren't running forward or whatever. We are not war criminals. We are not going to wipe out our comrades to make them 300s. The man vows that, quote, "I'm not going to follow criminal orders." He condemns his commanders for sending men into battle, quote, "with no artillery support, no assistance, no infantry support, no provisions going forward in the field." He says that commanders have no communication with their units and lack information about the situation in the area and the location of the units, which results in loss of life. They do not know what is happening in their direction in the area of responsibility. There is no communication with the units that are there. Our artillery is sometimes aimed at our positions while Russian soldiers are sitting there. And again, we just saw that in the previous thread, or the first thread about, friendly fire. He says that if the soldiers refuse to follow orders, they are threatened with being shot, executed, thrown in a pit, or struck with artillery fired from their own side. The men appealed to senior commanders to suspend Rostov and review the legality of his actions. I mean, this is terrible, and it's a sort of claim that we've seen widespread from Russian sources. But again, as someone said this morning, but if this happens so much, why are they still defending so resolutely? Why has this not made any meaningful difference? Is this all overhyped? Is this actually really happening? And my answer is, as I said this morning, yes, it is really happening. I don't think there's any doubt that this is happening. The question is, how much effect does that have on frontline troops or on frontline territory exchanges and the Ukrainians' ability to take land back, to liberate land? And these guys can complain all they like, but you then put them in a trench. These guys are complaining on videos, sending that video somewhere else, right? And then going back to their trenches to like this is in Bakhmut, right? Say these guys are in Klishchiivka, they're still, unless they're going to openly surrender now, they've had so much that they're going to surrender, they're still going to fight. So it's surrender or fight, right? Those are your two options, because if you don't surrender, you're going to get shot. And so therefore, to stop being shot, you're going to fight. Okay, so low morale troops, my point is that low morale troops are still going to provide and I say effective, it's not the most effective, but it will be an effective defense given like their environment and their defenses and fortifications. Whacking men with guns in trenches and in fortifications is still going to be a challenge for the Ukrainians to overcome. Right, so as long as these guys are willing to pull the trigger, then morale won't have that much effect. It has an effect to the point where they decide to split or to surrender. But as we heard, if they split, they get shot by the people behind. So that option isn't there. However, that being said, we've heard claimed by the Ukrainians that since from September to May, 16,000 people have supposedly surrendered to the surrender hotline. So this perhaps does have a tangible effect, this low morale, in increasing the number of people who do surrender. So that's worth taking into account. But of course, there are still a large number of troops. So even if that were true and there were as many as 16,000 people from September to May, there's still an awful lot who haven't surrendered who are willing to pull that trigger. Right, lots of people have been asking me to have a little read of Timothy Snyder. Timothy Snyder is a historian that is really worth following, taking heed of. He's great. He's got a great knowledge of Ukraine. His book on tyranny is great on its own, but the audio version of it with the second part on tyranny on Ukraine, the on Ukraine part is absolutely superb and is a must listen. Anyway, I think he does a course on Ukraine as well online that you can, a Yale course maybe or something, that I think is free on YouTube. You can go and have a look at. But anyway, let's dip into what he says. And he's talking about kind of the state of affairs, the state of the war, where we're at. Russia's gains in the invasion were made almost entirely during the first few weeks in February and March 2022. I'm just excerpting several parts here. Those gains were largely possible thanks to the fact that Russia had seized the Crimean Peninsula in its early invasion of Ukraine in 2014. Over the course of 2022, Ukraine won in the battles of Kyiv, Kharkiv, and Kherson and took back about half of the territory Russia had gained. In the first half of 2023, Russia undertook an offensive that gained almost nothing but the city of Bakhmut. In the second half of this year, Ukraine has undertaken a counter-offensive, which has taken far more territory than did the Russian offensive, but which has not yet changed the overall strategic position, but could. In Russia, he double spaces. In Russia, a military coup was attempted, but Yevgeny Prigozhin, the leader of the mercenary group that took Bakhmut, He and Putin made a deal after which Putin killed him. In a related development, Sergei Surovikin, probably the most capable Russian general, has been relieved of his command. Russia now has no meaningful offensive potential. Its strategy is to continue terror against civilians until Ukrainians can endure no longer. This, judging from my experience anyway, is not a tenable approach. On the other hand, Russia has had time to extensively fortify a long line of defense in the east and south and to prepare for Ukrainian offensive. This makes Ukrainian offensives very difficult. So that kind of lays up where we're at. And it's worth going through that to realize actually how insubstantial Russian gains have been and how really the whole war has just been a big failure. Like, you can hear Russian voices in threads, pro-Kremlin trolls, like, you know, all the usual ones like Clive Engel on my threads, blurting out TASS and Russian MOD narrative. But the reality is that the second greatest army in the world has been nothing short of a pile of horse manure. They've just been, it's been an abject failure. I don't, like, the evidence is there. Like, the evidence is in. Right, a year and a half, and they barely took Bakhmut, and that's been somewhat taken back off them to varying degrees. They have been pushed out of Kherson, Kharkiv. They failed to get Kyiv. They were supposed to take Kyiv in 3 days. It's a year and a half later. So the idea that when they're full of bravado, that they could take on NATO and the US is just laughable. It's just, I mean, this is a massive embarrassment for the Russians. Now, we can talk about how the Ukrainians are struggling at the moment and they're not doing as well as we would like in a perfect world. But that's down to the supply of weaponry and whatnot from allies. I mean, it doesn't matter that Ukraine's doing this with the help of allies. It's Russia have failed in achieving what they very obviously set out to achieve. In fact, they failed, as I wrote back in April last year. They failed within the first week. Like, once they realised they couldn't take Kyiv within 3 days. It's all a failure. So the last year and a half has been a question of, well, how much do you want to fail by? Like, the objective was to have a new government in charge of Kyiv and Ukraine, a puppet government, Russian puppet government. That ain't happened. So how much of the army do you want to lose? Like, how much of a failure do you want this to be? What they'd like to come out of this with is some kind of formal agreement that gives them Crimea that they already had anyway, but they kind of want it more formally, and I don't think that's ever going to happen. So it's just how much you're going to fail. Anyway, he goes on to talk in detail about what happened with the counteroffensive, talks about Elon Musk, talked about lots of bits and pieces here. It goes on to say, that said, Ukrainian territorial advances this summer have been sufficient to trigger a barrage of calls for a ceasefire from Kremlin-friendly voices. So he was going on to say, look, okay, it's been slower than maybe some people were expecting, and here the reason why it hasn't gone as successfully as some might have wanted. But we've got to a point, and this is a really, really salient point. We've got to this position whereby Kremlin-friendly voices are calling more loudly for a ceasefire. Now, if that's the case, and this is exactly what people like, I think Kuleba was saying this, not Budanov, but certain other Ukrainian politicians and spokespeople were saying, look, they're going to start pretty much soon, because we're doing all right. They're going to start clamoring for prediction. They'll start clamoring for ceasefire. And that's because we are starting to hurt them. And that's exactly what's happening. Given the way the media seems to work, these calls, rather than the events on the ground, sometimes seem to be the news. So pro-Kremlin op-eds smuggle in the assumption that Ukraine is not advancing, when in fact it is. Like, it's a stalemate. No, they are advancing methodically, bite and hold, bite and hold. You've got to understand, you've got to be people like us that are watching this on a micro level day in, day out. Now, most of our mates and friends and family and people we know at the workplace aren't doing that, right? So they read the mainstream media and say, it's all a failure, it's a stalemate. Actually, we know the attrition rates. We know what's going on, because we're paying close enough attention to these details. And actually, that gives us a more realistic understanding of the successes of this counteroffensive. And the successes aren't. I've explained this. How many times have I explained this? It's about different levels of objectives. So your primary objective is take back territory, but actually it's not. It's not primary in the sense of it's your overarching objective, but it's not the most pressing objective. So the pressing objective now, number one objective, that then eventually feeds into the territory objective, is attrition of artillery, attrition of air defence, and attrition of equipment and troops. But I would say artillery first, air defence second, and then all the rest. So if they are doing that, then they are achieving their objectives. And then once that is taken to a sufficient level, other things will fall into place, i.e. territory, okay? But not everyone kind of realises that. The Kremlin allies make their case in terms of Ukrainian suffering, but never cite Ukrainians, and this is so true. How about we ask Ukrainians what's going on here? Right? Let's not use them as pawns or make decisions on their behalf. Oh, it's all failing. I think there should be a ceasefire now. Don't the Ukrainians get a vote in that? How about we ask them? Should there be a ceasefire? Do you think we should have some appeasement? No. You can jog on. Ain't going to happen. So let's remember to always think about what Ukrainians want, nor the polling data that shows overwhelming support for the war from the Ukrainian side. They want to continue defending. There is zero reason to believe that the Kremlin would actually feel constrained by such an agreement in any place. So even if we did give them this agreement, would they then go, thank you very much, and stop there? If it did, it did not even begin to hold to the terms of the agreement after the last invasion. So, they did Crimea, they did Donbass, and they still wanted more. And invading again, Moscow has violated all of its agreements with Ukraine while making clear that it does not consider Ukraine a state. So let's listen to the Russian propagandists, right? And as Synder goes on to say, Russian propagandists talking to Russian audiences do not hide that the goal is the destruction of the Ukrainian nation, and that a ceasefire would just be meant to buy time. So let's listen to the Russians and let's listen to the Ukrainians. Let's stop making decisions on both their behalves, right? The Russians are saying Ukraine should not exist, should cease to exist as a philosophical entity, as a culture, as a history, as a language, as a peoples. It should cease to exist. That's what they're telling us day in, day out on national television. Right, so why should we go, I'll tell you what's a good idea. And I'm in rant mode, as you can tell. I know what's a good idea. Let's do appeasement with Russia, because Russia, what do you want? We want that country to cease to exist. Oh, sorry, no. We want Crimea and Donbass. Yeah, Crimea and Donbass. Yeah. Did I just say we want them to cease to exist? Yeah, you did, but I don't think they heard. Okay, cool, nice one. Yeah, that's cool. We'll just take Crimea and Donbass. Oh, brilliant. Okay, and Ukraine, what do you want? We don't want to do an agreement with Russia. Okay, we're going to have an agreement with Russia, right? And you're going to give Crimea and Donbass, and you're going to take Crimea and Donbass. Should we all shake on it? Ukraine goes, screw you. And Russia goes, why, yes, we're very much like that. And then we'll help ourselves to the rest. And it's just, it's absolutely ridiculous. I'm not sure we've got any right to say, to argue for appeasement. I don't think we've got any right to do that. At the most, all we have a right to do is not to provide Ukraine any more aid, right? At the most, all we should be able to do is say, we're not going to give you any more aid because of whatever reason. I would disagree with that vehemently. I think we should give them as much aid as we can, right? Military aid, for sure. All sorts of aid. So, but if you're talking about, do we have a, what do we have a kind of a justification to do? I don't think we have a justification to invite Ukraine or force Ukraine, not even invite, force Ukraine to the diplomatic table to have some kind of appeasement with Russia. It's nuts. Just imagine that America was invaded by Russia, right? They took Alaska and they were helping themselves maybe to, Washington State, Oregon, coming down there. And although probably a lot of Americans go, yeah, that's fine if you're conservative, Oregon and everything. I'd probably use the wrong example. Maybe Texas, but then a lot of left-wingers go, yeah, that's fine. I don't know. But imagine there were parts of America that were taken by Russia and the rest of the world saying, well, I think you should give that up now, America. Yeah, you should probably do a deal because, let's appease this. We don't want to escalate it any further. Americans would be like, screw you. We've just been invaded and we want our country back. Thank you very much. So we should not be talking appeasement at all. But that's what Russia, of course, are wanting. And yeah, anything that plays into the hands of Russian propagandists is a wrong move. Now that the nuclear bluff has largely worn itself out, true, Moscow has changed its approach, trying instead to make people believe that nothing is happening on the battlefield. Moscow's hope is to motivate Ukraine's allies to restrain Ukraine long enough for Russia to shift the balance of forces in its favour. Okay, and he goes on later to say, the war has brought an entirely new theory of what defensive war means, fighting only on one's own territory. This does not correspond to international law and has never made any sense. So he was talking about, okay, well, so what do we need to do from here? How do we help them? How do we help Ukraine prevail? And it's long distance munitions, it's this, it's that, etc., etc. But I think that I've highlighted this point because I think it is important. So this is like saying you can't attack Russia within Russia. So you can't use our weapons to attack Russian territory or Russian. You can't. All those missiles, the news today that there are 46 Iskander missile systems along the border of Ukraine. Those missiles that are blowing up your cities and killing your civilians, you're not allowed to blow those missile launchers up. Why aren't we allowed? Yeah, they're in Russia. Yeah, but they've invaded us. They've invaded us and they're blowing our stuff up inside our country. Why can't we blow their stuff up inside their country that is attacking us? It's flying through the air and landing in our country. Yeah, no, you can't do that because, why not? Because, no, I don't know. Escalation? Yeah, look at the last year and a half. What's escalated? Yeah, but nuclear. Yep, it ain't happening, mate. It ain't happening. So I totally agree with what Snyder's saying here. It's a bit like rooting, he says, for a basketball team, but believing it should play without ever taking the ball past half court, or rooting for a boxer, but claiming he's not allowed to throw a punch after his opponent does. Had such a notion been in place in past wars, none of Ukraine's partner would ever have won any of the wars they are proud of winning. That is a point. He has landed a punch there. That is a good point. Like, if we had ever fought wars previously that we'd won and so happy with winning, well done, look how amazingly we did in World War II or 100 Years' War or whatever it is, and we did X, Y, and Z. It's like, yeah, but we had to fight with the way that we are imploring Ukraine to fight. We'd never have done that. No air support. We're not giving them airframes. We are now, of course. We're not giving the ATACMS, or hopefully we are now. We're not giving this. And you can't fire into Russia. It's like, it's ridiculous, isn't it? He goes on to say Ukraine will not do in Russia. So even if they did, say, move troops into Russia, if Ukraine will not do in Russia most of the things Russia has done in Ukraine, it will not occupy or seize territory, it will not execute civilians, it will not build concentration camps and torture chambers. What it must be allowed to do to have some chance of stopping those Russian practices in Ukraine is to have the capacity to win the war. With every village that Ukraine takes back, we see that the most important de-escalation away from war crimes and genocide towards something more like a normal life. So, best form of de-escalation is kind of winning the war, I guess, is the point there. And he goes on to say, much more. It's well worth looking at. It's on his Substack. So look for Timothy Snyder, Snyder.substack. Good stuff, Timothy Snyder. Appreciate that. And finally, we'll do a bit of an Anton Gerashchenko something that he's alerted us to. It's just a nice story to end with. Instead of 1,000 words, this picture tells a story. So what is happening here? Well, defender Vladislav and his love Anna were to have their wedding on the 7th of August. A few days before that, Vladislav was heavily wounded on the front lines. I'm wondering if that's what's left of one of his legs there. Doctor said he might not survive. He woke up in the ICU the day before the wedding was supposed to happen. They got married right in the hospital on the 7th of September. Wishing them so many happy and peaceful years together. So that is a nice story to end the extra with. Thank you so very much for supporting the channel. I really do appreciate it a lot. Take care, everybody. Toodle pips. I'll speak to you tomorrow.